Good to see you guys today. I'm gonna talk about this again during announcements, but there's kind of a very important thing that's happening to our ministry. Including this Sunday, we only have 4 Sundays in this building. If you haven't noticed, for those of you that live in this area, they're preparing to tear down everything in this entire block, including this building. And so actually, everyone's supposed to move out by this Friday, November 30th. But we're kind of quietly going to have worship service here until December 16th. So December 16th is our final Sunday here. I'll talk about this more later. But we'll be moving to the Sangha, which is behind the main church, which is very difficult to explain in English. But regardless, yes, we are in the middle of a transition. And some of these details have just gotten clarified to me recently. But just letting you guys know, we only have a few more Sundays left in this building, so let's enjoy it while we can. Okay, with that, welcome. I do see quite a few new faces, so welcome. For those of you that are here for the first time, and yes, let's just enjoy this time of worship and just hearing from the Word together. We've been going through the book of Ephesians. We're getting very close to the end, but with that, we're going to start with chapter 6, verses 1 to 9. For those of you that are familiar with Ephesians, this is where Paul writes to children and to parents as well as to slaves and masters. And let me just make it very clear, all of us in this room are either a child to someone or a slave to someone, whether we know it or not. All right, so I don't know about you guys, but I don't know where this came from, right? Are you guys familiar with the Obey clothing? This got popular a few years ago, and to me, when I started noticing this, and I do see people wearing this in Korea every now and then, I just found it very ironic. And I was like, wow, I see a lot of millennials wearing this, but this is like the last thing they would ever choose to do. I don't understand. This word obey, and it just seemed very ironic, and it's popping up everywhere. I'm actually curious, does anyone actually know whose face that is? I'm going to tell you in a second. You probably don't know. Some of you are probably too young to know who this man is. But let me tell you where Obey came from. So there's this guy, Shepard Fairey, this guy right here. He is born in 1970. He's a bit older than me. When he was an art student in Rhode Island, he made this sticker which said, "Andre the Giant has a posse." And then I think he got in trouble for licensing, so he changed it to Obey Giant. Okay? So that picture, which you saw before, that's Andre the Giant. Okay, so that's Andre the Giant. Just kind of zoomed in here. Now, some of you are like, who is Andre the Giant? He was a huge guy. Like it even says here, 7'4", 520 pounds. If you guys don't know English units, just know that's huge. Like think about in the Bible, like Goliath. Basically, he was the living form of Goliath. But at the same time, has anybody seen Princess Bride? Classic movie. Yes, so a couple of us are old, but regardless, he's in Princess Bride. He plays a giant, but he's like the most tender soul like you've ever seen. But I know him because I used to watch wrestling when I was a kid. So he was a very famous WWF wrestler. This is back in the Hulk Hogan days, Macho Man Randy Savage. Most of you guys have no idea what I'm talking about. Regardless, Obey Giant came from this, and then Shepard Fairey actually became famous because of the Obama poster back in, I think, 2007 during the elections. And so around that time, the brand got really big, and then all of a sudden people are wearing Obey, which I just found very ironic. When I was kind of thinking of what to name this sermon, the word obey just sticks out because when you look at the passage, the word obey comes up again and again and again. So I'm like, okay, I got to use obey. And then all of a sudden I was like, why do people wear clothing that says obey in it? I don't know, like when I was in high school, I had this really cranky physics teacher, really old guy, and he's actually part of the reason why I became an engineer, because I love physics. I don't know, I'm a nerd. I know you like physics too, Justin. But I enjoyed physics, but he would always make fun of us, because we would come wearing these like name brand clothing. Right? And back then, I'm dating myself, but back then, Tommy Hilfiger was popular. So we would walk in with this like Tommy shirt, and he'd be like, oh, you're wearing advertising for the companies, ha ha ha. And so like his joke was that we're basically freely advertising these brand names. That's basically what we're doing when we're choosing to wear those clothing. But like now I see like the word obey. It's just kind of funny to me. I see the boy London. I see boy, but then usually it's not boys wearing boy. Like I see a lot of girls wearing boy. I'm confused. Actually, the other day I was in the subway and there was this like kind of older gentleman. He wasn't a grandpa. He wasn't a harabuji. But he was older than an ajashi. So he's like a hara ajashi. But he was sitting next to me, and you know how like Korean men like to maximize the space they take anywhere. So he's got his like legs spread apart. He's like trying to sit back, but I'm broad shouldered, so he's like uncomfortable. So he starts like leaning forward. He's like still spread like that. And then I'm just like, man, what's wrong with this guy? He finally gets up because he can't take it anymore. So he gets up before his stop, and he's just like standing. And like I said, he's like an older guy, but he's wearing this boy London jacket. I was just like amazed. But anyway, it has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. But yes, the irony of the things that we wear and the irony of the word obey. Let's get into the passage today. Ephesians 6, verses 1 to 9. Open up your Bible, smartphones, or look at the screen. Ephesians 6, starting from verse 1. The Lord says this: Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. Amen. So as I said, or actually I haven't said this, but our theme for this year, 2018, is Emmanuel, which means God with us through the wilderness. So whether we are going through seasons of difficulty or seasons of victory and joy, God is with us. And so our hope for this year is that we would recognize the presence of God in our lives. We've been going through the book of Ephesians to start off with this epic story of God's plan of redemption and how Jesus Christ was bringing everything into reconciliation, and the power of God raised Jesus from the dead. It's the same power that actually saves us, not our works. But at the same time, we are created to do the good works of God. And from chapter 4, it starts talking about, walking in the way worthy of the calling, how to live your life understanding the reality of chapters 1 to 3. And he gives these contrasts. You are to walk in the way of love, but you are to let go of the old and to put on the new. Cast off the old, put on the new. Be a children of light, right? Child of light, not of darkness. And to choose to live as wise, not as unwise. So Paul has given us these contrasts of ultimately choices. Brothers and sisters, the way we live our lives is a series of choices, but it comes from understanding who we are and why we make the choices that we're meant to make. And so 2 weeks ago, when we went over the passage on wives and husbands, it was Paul was applying what this means. To live in wisdom, to live as someone filled with the Holy Spirit who is choosing to submit to each other. And he says, wives, submit to your husbands. Right? That's what we talked about 2 weeks ago. So now, as I've said before, Paul is addressing what's understood as the household order, but contrasting with 1 Peter, which we went through in the beginning of the year, Peter only talked to the people that were kind of on the bottom. He talked to the slaves, he talked to the wives, he talked to people that were in places of oppression. But Paul actually speaks to both. He speaks to both husbands and wives. He speaks to both children and parents, or specifically fathers in this text. He speaks also to slaves and masters. So Paul's covering all the bases of what is understood as the household order in Greek culture. So let's get into this. First thing I want to mention is that Paul actually addresses children, right? He says, children, obey your parents. Right? That in itself is actually a very radical thing. Paul is actually choosing to address children directly as if they are normal members of the community. And I think this is something that it's very easy to just kind of like pass over, but ultimately, this is something we generally don't do, right? I remember when I was in high school, my favorite class was actually political science. I ended up being an engineer, which I don't know how that worked, but political science was my favorite class. And one of the things my teacher kind of left an imprint with me was, she said the most underrepresented people group in America are children, because no one speaks for them. But Paul right here is actually speaking directly to the children in the community as if they are viable members of the community. I think that's an important point to take, is that children are addressed as if they are just members, not as if they are anything inferior or someone who is not yet ready to be seen as a member. Paul says children, and then he says, obey your parents. Now, obey in itself is much stronger than the word submit, right? There's a lot of controversy over the text that we went over 2 weeks ago, wives submit to your husbands. Submit is actually not anywhere near as the word obey in the Greek language, especially the way it's written here. In this Greek, obey is written in the present imperative, right? It is a command that is continuous, whereas submit was spoken in the middle voice. So it was actually a weaker command, and the word itself, obey, is stronger. And we see the word obey exclusively in this relationship between children and parents, and slaves and masters. And so Paul is saying to children, obey. Right? Obey your parents. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a Korean American. I was born and raised in the States, and particularly for people in my generation, people who were born in the States but parents were from Korea, this was not always an easy thing. Right? I know some of you guys, have gone through these experiences where some of the things your parents were commanding, you did not want to do, right? And there's a lot of clashes that happen, and a lot of people struggled with this. And specifically from my own experience, in the many years of counseling and times people ask me for advice, I'd say the two things that were the main issues were, first, like people that you were either dating or wanting to marry, right? Like, oh, my parents object, right? That was honestly the most common thing people would come up to me. Second thing is career, they don't want me to study this, blah blah blah. But that was usually a very, very distant second. Number one was always relationships. And so I've had friends who had to break up because their girlfriend or boyfriend's parents didn't agree. And this is a very common thing that I didn't deal with it, because honestly my parents were like, if she's female and alive, she's okay. I got old, right? For those of you that don't know, I got married this year. So my parents, they're just happy. They don't care anything about she's gonna say she likes you, okay. They don't care about anything else. But I know for a lot of other people, this is a difficult issue. And some of the logic that you would hear on why they disapprove wouldn't make sense. I had a friend, he was a really devout believer at the time, and he was really spearheading this campus ministry basically by himself. So he was running this thing by himself as a college student, and he fell for this girl who was a PK. Her dad was a pastor. And the reason why they objected was because his parents weren't believers. But the irony is that when they met each other, they were Christians, but their parents weren't believers. So they were applying something that didn't actually, mean anything to them, and that's why he broke up. And personally, honestly, it broke my heart, because ever since then, he still goes to church, but I don't see the same level of fervor that I used to see. And so personally, I always that story always kind of bothers me. I'm going on a tangent, so I got to keep going. So says, obey your parents in the Lord, right? That doesn't say obey your parents, it says obey your parents in the Lord. So Paul is reminding children that, you know what, you're obeying your parents as if you are obeying the Lord. For this is, in the NIV says, for this is right. The more literal translation is, for this is righteous. Right? So to obey your parents, according to Apostle Paul, is the right or the righteous thing to do. This is regardless of who your parents are. And he goes on and he quotes from the Old Testament, but he actually quotes from Deuteronomy 5 rather than Exodus 20. Exodus 20 is the original telling of the Ten Commandments. Deuteronomy 5 is when Moses retells the Ten Commandments to the second generation. Okay? But there's a slightly different nuance to Deuteronomy 5. In Deuteronomy 5, it doesn't just have that you will have long life, but and things will go well. Like that got added in Deuteronomy 5. And so Paul quotes from Deuteronomy 5 when he talks about why you should obey your parents, because it is part of the Ten Commandments. It's the first commandment among people, right? Among your behavior among people is to honor your father and your mother so that you will live long on this earth and that it will go well with you. Right? Honor your father and your mother. Now, actually, my wife asked me about this the other day. She was like, "What's the difference between honor and respect?" And I was kind of dumbfounded. I was like, "I don't know. Wait, aren't they the same thing?" And actually, in English, honor and respect is almost interchangeable. I think if you look in like English dictionaries, it will maybe say that honor is to greatly respect. Right? So it's like a higher version of respect. I don't know, but when I actually looked into the original languages, honor in Hebrew is the word, the verb form of kavod, right? Kavod, if you guys remember, as I've talked about before, kavod is the word for glory, right? And glory, and actually it means weight. And so basically when you say kavod in a verb form, when it says honor your father and mother, you are adding weight to them, right? You are esteeming value to them. And in the Greek, it's timao, which is where the word Timothy comes from. So if anybody's named Timothy, your name means honor. But anyway, timao basically means a very similar thing. You are placing value. You are estimating value onto something. And one of the things I want you to understand is the Bible never says respect your father and mother. It only says honor. In the relationship between child and parent, it is always the place of honor, not that of respect. And so what we can take from all this is basically, regardless of who your parent is, as a child, if you are to honor them, then you are placing value onto them, whether they deserve it or not. And you are seeing them with that value, even if they are unworthy. So in many ways, honor is actually a choice. Whereas respect, yes, you can choose whether to respect someone or not, but respect generally has to do, actually, the word for respect in most of the Greek and Hebrew is the word for fear. Right? And I've talked about this before. But fear and respect kind of coincide in the Bible. But that usually comes from a place of position. Right? You fear someone because they are in a position higher than you. It usually comes from who they are rather than what they've done. But with the word honor, it's a choice that you are making. It is not just something you're doing because you have to. You are choosing to place value. You are choosing to love that person in that way, whether they deserve it or not. And I know this is difficult for some of you, because for some of you, you might have difficult relationships with one or both of your parents. I understand that. And so for some of us, this statement is a difficult one. Honor your father and mother. You know, for some of us it's easy, because some of us have parents that really go that extra effort. And so some of our parents are easy to love. But that's not always the case. And another thing I want us to understand about honoring your father and mother, it goes beyond just obeying them as children, but once you reach adulthood, It goes into continuing to respect them and to also provide for them as they grow older. Right? This is something that's in like when you look at the Jewish writings, when they understand honor your father and mother, it extends into adulthood, because whether you like it or not, you will always be a son or a daughter of somebody. That identity never changes. You might not view yourself as a child, I hope you don't, but you will always be the son or daughter of somebody. And so, brothers and sisters, there is a need for us as sons and daughters to continue to honor our parents even as we extend into adulthood. And for me, brothers and sisters, the reason why I'm emphasizing this is because whether you know it or not, South Korea has become a very difficult place for the elderly. Like if you actually look at the statistics, it's ridiculous the amount of poverty that the elderly live in. Like a couple years ago, 2015, NPR did a report and they actually interviewed our church. So this is actually, I think, Shimbampo. This is the Shimbampo area. And if you're ever here on a Thursday morning, you will see this long line of grandparents, right? And they're all wearing like hiking gear. So it looks like they're about to go mountain climbing together, right? You see this every Tuesday. I think it starts from 9 a.m. Or no, Thursday, sorry. Every Thursday from 9 a.m. And so NPR came to interview our church about this, because this is actually a partnership between three churches. It is our church, it is Shimbampo Church, which is next door, and then it's also the Catholic Center, which is like just a couple doors down from us. So these three ministries have combined, and this is actually an unofficial ministry of our church. You look at our website, you will find nothing about this. It was started by the office staff at our church. And what happened was in 1998, when the IMF crisis happened in Korea, a lot of people came to our church begging. And the reason why is because we're close to Express Bus Terminal, and so they kind of naturally made their way over here. And our office staff had compassion for them, and so they decided to partner with the other two churches. And every Thursday, each church gives 500 won. So one person gets 1,500 won because it's three ministries. So there's people handing out 500 won, but they also hand out like food. There's like maybe like a banana, a milk. I know sometimes in the wintertime they'll get donations for like winter clothes, so sometimes they'll give out like jackets and stuff like that. They do this every Thursday morning. This is not an official ministry. You'll find nothing about this. NPR found out somehow. They wrote an article about this. A lot of the people that help out are actually people that work in the local businesses. I know there's KB Hana, the bank behind our church. A lot of that office staff comes out to volunteer just because they want to help. But I'm very proud of our church for being involved in this. But at the same time, there's a lot more needed. Because if you really look at what's going on with the elderly, you see these elderly people picking up trash for recycling. You see them selling stuff in the subways. The reality is, many of them are living in poverty, and there are very few people that are reaching out to them. This is what has happened in Korea. And to me, it's a travesty. And to me, I think if we had taken, if every generation had taken the heart of honoring fathers and mothers, maybe this wouldn't be as severe of an issue. I don't know. But regardless, brothers and sisters, I want us to understand that when we honor our fathers and mothers, this goes beyond childhood. This goes through our adulthood, and this goes through taking care of them as best that we can. Continuing onward. Now on the other side, Paul flips the script and he's like, fathers, don't exasperate your children. How many of you ever felt exasperated by your parents? You can point to the Bible like, this is what you did to me. And honestly, this is where I think issues come. I think one of the issues that has happened, especially for many in my situation that lived abroad, is that the values that parents were pushing onto us as children weren't always biblical. Right? I know for myself, growing up as a Korean American, if you were not a doctor, lawyer, or engineer, you were a failure. Right? Later they added pastors because it's still a neem, right? So as long as you're a neem, you're okay. But like that was a lot of pressure that was placed on the people. And so I think one of the things that parents, I think especially Asian parents, have lost is that it's not necessarily their job to mold their children to be very specific people. Their job is to raise them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. If you look at Deuteronomy 6, this is the Shema. This is one of the most famous prayers that Israelites still pray, I think, at least twice a day. And it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up." And it continues talking about how you need to have them on your forehead and on your arm and all that stuff. I talked about that before. And Deuteronomy 6 is right after Deuteronomy 5, where the Ten Commandments is told. So basically, what Moses was telling them through what God says here is that for Israelites, they are taught to impress God upon their children. Right? The ways of God, the commands of God, who God is. Not that their children will be specific type of people, but to just raise them up in the Lord. So brothers and sisters, I think if this had been what our parents were doing, I think there would be less issues. But I think this is where the disconnect happens. Is that there's a lot of control. Asian parents are very, very controlling, right? You come home with that report card, you're like, "Hey, I got a 99. Where's that extra point?" That's the pressure that was placed, but that's not necessarily biblical. So parents are to raise their children in the Lord. This is the reason why we have baby dedications. This is why parents make the commitment to do what they can to just impress godliness upon their children. But at the end of the day, coming to faith is only by grace alone. Someone can be raised in the most Christian of environments and still never come to know the Lord. So I want us to understand, yes, being raised by Christian parents helps, but at the end of the day, coming to believe in God is only through grace. And so when that child eventually grows up and either gets baptized or confirmed, there's a lot of joy, because what that is showing is that yes, the parents raised them in a godly way, but ultimately God is the one who saved them. Right? That is what the celebration and joy is from. Moving on to the next relationship. Slaves, obey your masters. So here, now let me pull back on a second here, because a lot of times when we hear the word slaves, especially for those of us that might have lived in the States, we start thinking of mid-Atlantic slave trade, Africans that were uprooted from their homes. Some of us maybe grew up watching the miniseries Roots, and you have this guy getting whipped. "What's your name, boy?" Kunta Kinte. But anyway, you guys don't know this miniseries. But that's not what slaves are in the Bible. Slaves were definitely people that were in lowly positions, but ultimately they were just indentured servants. They weren't necessarily the property of the slave master. Yes, they were treated harshly, but honestly, their relationship is not that different from someone that works at a company, especially here in Korea. Because even for me, when I became an engineer in the States, the first thing I had to sign was I was waiving my rights to all intellectual property. Right? Basically, when I was hired by Motorola, I was saying anything that is generated in this mine is yours. Right? And so for all of us, when we start working for a company, we sign these contracts, and they're not that different from these slave contracts in the Bible. So what I want you guys to understand is when the Bible says slaves, all of you should perk up, because you're all slaves. Y'all work. Right? and he says earthly masters. So he says, He says earthly masters. He uses the word kurios, which is often translated as Lord, which is usually referring to Christ. But here he puts the word earthly. Or I think in some of your texts it says in the flesh. But basically, Paul is saying, when you are in this situation of when you are enslaved to someone, you are to obey them as you are to obey Christ. Okay? You are not a slave of them, as the text says, you are slaves of Christ. And by serving them, by doing what blesses them and being a good slave to that master, you are glorifying God. Now, this can be a difficult relationship sometimes, right? Because sometimes some of you guys work for people or companies you don't trust, right? And it's hard to be a good slave when you have a difficult master. But the text is very clear, is that serving them is the same as serving Christ. Obeying and submitting is trusting the Lord. Because the Lord is the one who placed them above you. The Lord is the one who has put you in this situation. So it's not our responsibility to rebel, which is honestly our natural inclination, right? As I said before, as humans, you put us in a difficult situation, the first thing we want to do is rebel. Right? This is why Les Miserables hits the heart of everybody. You hear the people singing the songs of angry men. We get pumped up because we want to rebel, but that is actually not biblical. Biblically, what we're taught is we choose first to submit and obey because we are trusting in the Lord. And in the NIV it says with fear, or with respect and fear, but the actual literal translation is with fear and trembling. Okay? Now, you need to remember that what precedes all of this, when it said submitting one to another in chapter 4, verse 21, was that our motivation for that is the fear of Christ. So remember, when we are choosing to respect and fear those placed above us, we are actually choosing to fear and respect Christ, who is above us all. And then he continues, serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each of you for doing for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. Now, to take a step back, when it talked about how not to do things that would get your favor, from your master and stuff. For those of you that have worked, you have probably met those people that are doing their best to brown nose, right? Some of you might not know what the term brown nose is, and to explain it kind of ruins the whole thing. But basically, there are people that like to, they do whatever they can to self-promote themselves. They will, be really endearing and nice to people that are above them in authority. And you can smell people that are trying to climb their way up, right? And I dealt with this as an engineer. There are people that would try to latch on to things that I'm working on because they want to take credit for it. And so that, brothers and sisters, is what we are told not to do. This is not about your benefit. This is about being a good slave to a master, and to do so wholeheartedly. This verse, especially the Colossians version of this verse, always hit home for me, because when I was an engineer, honestly, I didn't work that hard. Engineering was when I rested. So I served at the church. So I was running a campus ministry. I was really busy. So when I came to work, I could relax. Right? This was around when YouTube first came out. I was on YouTube all the time. I was just chilling. But then every time I would read this passage, I'm like, oh Lord, I'm not giving my whole heart. Convict me, Lord, to do better. And every time I would have a performance review, I was expecting my manager to be like, you know what, you're not really performing, we need to make some adjustments. But every time they would praise me. And I'm like, I don't understand. If you saw what I did every single day, you would realize I'm the laziest person here. And yet you still praise me. And so, always boggle my mind. But basically, when you read this, what I want you to understand is, whatever you are doing, God wants you to give your best. doesn't necessarily mean you have to excel, right? But God wants you to give your best. Whether you're a student, right? When your situation is you're a student, study as best that you can. If you're working, be diligent, right? Give your best, as if you are serving the Lord. And that's it. Now this can be difficult at times. And honestly, if you're lazy like me, it can be really difficult at times. But this is what this passage is saying. Whatever position you are, give it your all. Now, as some of you know, I'm switching to full-time on the Korean side in January, and it's actually starting earlier than that. It's starting some of it's starting in December. To me, this is me choosing to submit. And it's not going to be easy. If some of you want to have a good time, show up when I have to preach in Korean, and you will just laugh. It will be like Comedy Central. It's like, this guy don't make any sense. What is he doing? Especially if you come during morning prayer, because I'll be half awake when I'm doing it too. But to me, like, this is a choice I'm making, partly because I feel like it's one of the ways I need to submit to this church. So God has placed me here. There are things that I have difficulty with, but at the same time, I'm choosing to do this. And so likewise, brothers and sisters, wherever God has placed you, do your best. Doesn't matter if they're watching you, doesn't matter if they're praising you, doesn't matter if it's to your benefit, but since God has put you into that position, God has put you in that seat, do your best. Know that you are representing the Lord as you do so. And then he turns it to masters. Paul turns it to masters, says, treat your slaves in the same way, do not threaten them, since you know that he is both their master and yours, that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, there's no favoritism with them. So here he turns it around. He's like, you know what, masters? Just as they are serving you as if you are the Lord, you are to serve them, right? As if they represent the Lord. Don't abuse the power that God has put you in. And don't abuse the authority that you have. Now, one of the unfortunate things that I see, especially here in Korea, is that everyone hates the abuse of power. Like, oh, it's horrible. They may make me work ungodly hours. When I'm in the military, like, they make me do these crazy, hazy things. When I'm in university, my upperclassmen make me do these crazy things. But then, when it's their turn, right? When people are upperclassmen, when people are higher ranking in the military, when people are higher up in work, they go back and they do the same thing to other people. They're like, now it's my turn. And it's like, no! This is your chance to end that cycle. Don't abuse the power that God will eventually place you in if you're not already there right now. Rather than taking advantage of people when you're in that position, don't. Serve them as if you were serving the Lord. Because we all have the same master, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is master to us all. So ultimately, brothers and sisters, whether you are, whether as a child to your parent or whether as a slave to your master, trust God by obeying those that God has placed above you. This is not an easy thing. Choosing to submit, choosing to obey is not an easy thing. But ultimately, by doing so, you're placing your trust in God. And then also, when you're in the position, when people are under you, when people are in your authority, be a good master to them. Okay? Be a good 선배. Okay? Be someone who encourages, that lifts up, that tries to break this chain of oppression. Because there is a master above us all. So be good to them as he is good to you. Let's take some time to pray. We'll go ahead and close for today. I want you to just hone in into one of these relationships, whether it's with your parents or whether it's with like a supervisor or a boss, whatever it is, I want you to just really hone in on one of these relationships that's been difficult for you. And just ask God, God, give me the heart and the ability to choose to obey and to submit to this person. Because by doing so, I'm trusting you. Let's take some time to just pray for that one particular relationship, that God would help us to really choose to trust Him and to obey Him. Let's pray. And lastly, let's just take some time to pray that we would grow in our trust for God, that we wouldn't, when we're in these difficult situations, that we wouldn't put it upon ourselves to fix these things, but that we would really act according to God's promptings and according to God's timing. So let's really just pray that we would grow ultimately in our trust in God. That we would trust that He is good, that we would trust that He will deliver us, that we would trust that even in these difficult times, He is still among us and He is still leading us. Let's just pray that we would grow in our trust in God. Let's pray. Father, help us to know, Lord, that You are good. You are great. You provide for us each and every day. And at the very least, Lord, You sent Your Son to bring us into relationship with You. So, Father, I pray, Lord, that if there's a difficult relationship in our life, Lord, between us and our parents or between us and our masters, Lord, I just pray, Lord, that we would learn to just lay it all down, Lord, and just trust in You. To seek to honor them, Lord, and to really just bless them, Lord, even in this difficult time, Lord. So help us, Father, Lord, to learn to trust in You by obeying those that You've placed above us, and to also learn to be good masters to those that You've placed under our care. Help us to grow in these ways, Lord, and to know, Lord, that You alone are in control, and that You alone, Lord, will provide. We thank You, Lord, and praise Your name, Jesus.